We are here because we are dedicated to helping the entire CrossFit community. Determined to elevate coaches, box owners, athletes, and everything in between, we believe that this mission will begin right here, right now. While this time and this goal begins with you, our hope is that you take this fire ignited within you and weave it into your own life with the same unrelenting passion to give those you have the privilege of coming in contact with the best hour of their day.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the best hour of their day. I am not sure I've ever wanted a podcast to be irrelevant. I hope this one is irrelevant, but I don't know that it will be. I've got two guests here, Geoff Westmoreland, who has been on the podcast before, and then Craig Howard, who is the owner of Diablo CrossFit out in California. And what we're going to discuss today is potential for lockdowns. So Geoff has obviously been on the, if you listen to the previous podcast, we talked a lot in the beginning of kind of COVID lockdowns. And he just dropped off. He'll hop back on. So I'll switch over to you, Craig. I wish we were just going to talk about the games, because that's a lot of where your experience is at, but we could talk about a little bit of that as well. Did you go to the games, by the way?
I was there, and
okay.
I was impressed. It was an awesome experience. They outdid themselves, given obviously the events of the last 18 months.
They I thought they did a fantastic job. Geoff and I were talking beforehand. I was a judge, so I because I work on seminar staff, I judge the individuals each year. This is my 8th year, and it was the most events we've ever judged, but it was at least on my end in the back, it was like the smoothest event we've ever had. So
that's fantastic.
Did you compete this year?
No, I did not compete this year.
Okay. I know you have a long history of competition.
As an athlete, it's been a few years since I've been there, but it's I still have it there buried.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What was your favorite event?
It was the clean ladder that they did with the run. That was, and I had my doubts about it when they started it. I thought that's just dumb. Why don't they have them go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? Why such a short run? And then I was just going nuts as they would come in trying to make the time cap. It was brilliant.
When they briefed us for that workout early in the week, I was way off on my calculation for the number of athletes that were going to make it through that ladder. I was like, there's no way. Like that's devastating weight. And I want to say like 50% of the field went through the 350 bar. I mean, it was a lot of guys went through that bar. And who is the two that were the most impressive? Jeff Adler.
Yeah.
And then Guy. The ease with which both of those guys went through the ladder was offensive.
Yeah. What was amazing, I started it, and I don't, other people around us were doing the same thing. We were trying to calculate by the second or third run, were they going to make it or not? Were they going to have enough time? Like I was weird. Look at the clock, look at the lift, look at the clock, look at the lift. And they had literally the ones that took the time to set up and engage and brace. Those are the ones that were the slowest and had the most difficult. The guys that came in just ripped and ripped. Holy crap.
It didn't even make sense, Guy, and he did the same thing on the snatch, where it's just like he didn't even think. He just grabbed the bar, cleaned it, and they were clean lifts too. I mean, they were beautiful.
That was a lot of fun.
I was just completely jealous. I'd been 5 years in a row up through 19, and of course nobody went last year, so this is the first year that I hadn't been, and so got a daughter going to college in 10 days or 7 days. So it was not the summer to take off and do it.
Yeah, it was a great event, and home office did a bang up job there. Dave I thought he wrote some really nice work. The one I actually really enjoyed judging, which is weird, but was the pegboard single arm overhead squat double under workout.
Another great workout.
That was a great workout.
Very impressive.
But anyway, so the topic that I want to discuss, just to give gym owners some things to chew on, is the looming doom of potential further lockdowns for boxes. So we've all been through quite the shitstorm over the past 18 months or so. I wanted to bring Geoff on to discuss some things from the legal side, but I also wanted to have you on, Craig, because you've kind of already been through this and had your battles through it. But I do want to throw a disclaimer out there. We are obviously not giving legal advice here. Just ideas that you can start having conversations with your attorney if you have one. And if you don't have one, I would suggest finding one, because this is probably pretty likely in some states to happen. And my fear, I don't know what the current state of affairs there in Louisiana, Geoff, and Craig in California. But if gyms have to close down a second time, I don't think they're reopening.
There were a number of affiliates that closed, that made it almost to the end and closed, or some that closed in the middle that I am aware of. Many that de-affiliated simply because they didn't have the cash flow to be able to pay the affiliate fees, and they won't be able to endure a second round of, and because landlords now are less tolerant and less forgiving, and so it puts them in a very difficult situation. I know several that will close if we have to close.
Yeah, and then of course you've got, these landlords are dealing. A lot of these landlords own, residential property and commercial property, and now with all these moratoriums on evictions, and now the new one, I mean, it's stressing the landlords too. So they can't be as forgiving. Our gym, our box is fortunate. We're actually bigger than we were before quarantine, but I think that's a factor of some of the gyms around us closing and people coming. But I agree with Craig. I mean, a lot of them are not going to make it, and we're in a part of the country where people are not that hard on the lockdowns. Although our current administration likes to put out a lot of mandates, but they're hurting on both sides, the tenants and the landlords, and it's to a breaking point on both sides.
Yeah. So Geoff, just to give people some context. So Geoff, your kind of specialty in law is real estate, but you're typically on the other end of that conversation. You typically represent the landlords.
Right. I do a lot of real estate, but also do real estate litigation, which is not necessarily common. A lot of people do real estate, just do the transaction side. Right. And I do the litigation as well. So I'm able to see it from both sides. When I'm writing a document, I also see how I'm going to litigate that document, and actually have before a document that I wrote, I ended up in litigation over. So, but I typically represent the landlords. Although since I did your podcast, Fern, I've helped a number of boxes out there with their leases, and I throw that invitation out to a lot of people, and I throw it out to people now. To the extent I have time, I'm always willing to get on the phone with a box owner for an hour or so and help them, give them ideas, because I think it's important, and they're fighting a losing battle. I mean, we know that gyms, a lot of gyms don't make a lot of money. Your average Globo gym or local gym, not CrossFit box, does not make tons of profit anyway. So you start hurting them in this way, and a lot of them will not come back.
There's a number of gyms that are facing lease renewals that are in danger of losing those leases. I think the damage from the past closures the complete damage is yet to be felt. I know a number of boxes in the Bay Area that have accrued significant rent debt. And these are gyms that have never operated with debt before. When you're faced with carrying a debt load, you have a slow month, a slow couple of months, it's a different situation than being debt-free. And these landlords are going to expect some sort of compensation for that past rent. So couple that with the stigma that has been cast upon gyms as being a place that are high risk for COVID transmission. And you as a landlord have got to consider them as a tenant versus someone else that isn't a high risk for COVID transmission. So we've been branded as tenants that are possibly affected by the mandates, the first one's affected, and then also a place of liability for spreading COVID-19. And you have a kind of a perfect storm here to oust gyms from these areas. CrossFit gyms are fond of industrial areas and light industrial areas. And the conundrum, the irony of that is that currently in the Bay Area, and as I'm sure it's true elsewhere in other major metropolitan areas, this type of space is highly desirable right now as a result of the pandemic, because we are places where the last mile companies can store their goods and services for same day or next day delivery. So Amazon, and so the space is like mine. I got 12,000 square feet that are near the interstate corridors, are now going for 30 to 40% more per square foot than they were a year ago.
That's brutal.
Right now. Oh yeah. And we're facing a lease renewal now. And my landlord made it very clear they have leased everything along the 580 corridor, and the 101 corridor has been gobbled up. And again, they call it last mile companies that are gobbling this stuff up.
That's interesting, because the we're kind of seeing the same thing here. And Geoff, I want to come back to you a minute and talk about the moratorium, because I'm actually not even entirely sure what the deal is with that at this point. But we're seeing the same thing here, Craig, but it actually has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the cannabis industry. So they just legalized it here. So people are looking for storage facilities and stuff like that. So, I mean, they are just, and they're paying top dollar for it because they can afford it. So there's a lot of things here working against the affiliates. You know, obviously, Craig or Geoff, you mentioned like most people are running, you know, probably most gyms are running something around 10 grand a month in gross revenue, like the vast majority of them. Some of them do significantly better, and I wish they all would. But, you know, if somebody goes from, we'll call it $9 a square foot, and they're like $18 now because that's what market will get me. Yeah, the landlord's not even going to talk to you. They're just going to be like, get out of here. Like, get out of here. I've got another tenant who's going to pay the first 6 months in cash.
Right. I mean, what's the irony? Out with gyms and let's rent them to cannabis owners. I mean, come on. If you saw my Facebook post today, it's like, when are we going to mandate eating healthy, exercising, not smoking?
Not soon enough.
So, and boy, I got some reactions on that one. But yeah, the moratorium, you know, I've glanced at it. What it basically says is, what's interesting is that the CDC gets to institute a moratorium on private business owners. I mean, it's the craziest thing we've ever been through. Not, you know, and so what they're saying is, in areas where COVID reaches a certain height, the moratorium applies. And the article I was reading just yesterday said in Louisiana, 62 of the 64 parishes apply to the federal moratorium because we have we're one of the higher states right now in terms of new COVID cases. So 62 of the 64 parishes apply on the moratorium. I was about to file an eviction at the end of September for a client. So I've got to kind of get my arms around it at some point here, but it just came out. But that's essentially what's happening. And of course, you know, not to get overly political, but, you know, Biden said in an interview, I'm not even sure it's constitutional or legal, but we're going to do it anyway. So, you know, we're in a time where, you know, and they did that to Craig. It was like, you know, we're just going to come do what we want to you, and then we're going to let you try to fight it later. And so, you know,
that's a good, I do want to talk about. So Craig, give people a little idea of like what because obviously there's a ton of different scenarios out there. Like mine was probably ideal by most standards, but yours was not. So what happened with your box and your landlord?
So when we were asked to, March 16th of last year, asked to shut down by the county, and we acknowledged it and agreed with it, especially because it was such an unknown quantity. Unknown entity. And so we shut down. I immediately contacted my landlord, who was very understanding, and agreed that she would abate the rent. This was actually a great conversation, and mastering the English language, she would abate the rent. I followed up with, and for as long as we needed, or until the mandate was over. So I said, well, it probably, in my estimation, is going to be a month, maybe 2, but we'll work around it. I sent an email to follow up and clarify. She replied back and said, I didn't mean to say abate. I meant defer, which meant that it would be at the back end of the rent. For us, that was, you know, having dealt or having worked with debt before, my wife and I managed to make the rent payments on time, so that we didn't have to, so that we weren't faced with it. It was enticing to want to let it go and to not make that payment, but we're in a position now where I don't have any back rent. We closed for a month. and then opened back up with outdoor park workouts, eventually opening up back indoors ahead of the mandates, before the mandates got, and then we started getting the fines.
So that is my question, right? So I've talked at length about this, and obviously this comes down to everybody's risk assessment, like how far do you want to take this? But
Right.
I have questions. I have like a lot of detailed questions with regard to who fined you, and then what was that chain of custody with regard to the fine, with regard to enforcement, and then how did you determine what your course of action was going to be now that you're just like, all right, well, I've got a fine here, like this is happening.
So I immediately contacted my attorney to find out what the legality of it was and what their ability was to enforce these fines, and he agreed to work on it. At the end of the day, and this was the county that was fining us, not the city.
Okay.
The cities had within the Bay Area had decided collectively to push the responsibility to the county to manage. This was from the district attorney's office. At first, the first was warnings of fines, and then I got a very stern letter from the district attorney himself, or an assistant district attorney himself, and I literally just got him on the phone, and he actually is a really good guy. We had a conversation, and he said, look, he didn't expect this to last long. If we stayed open, he was going to start fining me. He recommended if there's another course of action I could take to take it and avoid the fine. And then I agreed to go outside. And that was until then we had fires in this area and lots of smoke, and I brought people back indoors, and then the fines immediately began. My attorney advised me during this time. We talked about it. We appealed every one of the fines. The next part of that process was to go to the appeals court, which was Zoom appeal. I prepared all the documentation. We failed in the appeals court, and then and the next step then would have been to appeal it to the California Superior Court. But the problem is this is where my attorney was great. He was, look, Greg, I'll gladly do this for you. But let me just give you an estimate of the cost of fighting this. He goes, if it's a jury trial, he goes, there's picking the jury, there's whole attempt picking the jury, and he goes, and it could go weeks. And he said, it's probably anywhere from $35,000 to $50,000 in attorney's fees to fight this. $7,000 in fines, or $7,000 fines. He goes, and because the courts are so backlogged because of the pandemic, you won't even be in court on this probably until next year, or maybe late next year. He goes, do you really want to be dealing with this then? And because of that decision, I elected to just pay the fines because of that conversation.
Yeah. So this actually is something that I wish more people would have considered. And obviously this is different state by state, but I've said this from the get-go, is like, everybody should do the math. In some states, the fines can only be levied for so many consecutive days, and there's a cap on the fine. And you have to just do that math. And we were talking beforehand, like most people, if you're like, hey, shut down your business for 2 months or pay $7,500 in fine, I'm like, that's not even a discussion. Like, I'll pay the fine. That's fine, because it's way worse the other way. So what's the outcome of that? You pay your fines and you're good?
Yeah. So we paid our fines, and then what they did is they could have come daily and given us $1,000 fine a day.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the part that I'm grateful for is they didn't do that. They came out about every week or every other week. They were coming out. When they came, though, and this is the part that I'm not congruent with, but I didn't make them feel comfortable. I didn't want them to feel comfortable giving me a fine.
Right.
So when they came, I literally would preach to them, here's what we're doing, here's how we're doing it. We're keeping our customers, healthy. I went through a litany of things, just to make them feel uncomfortable. I want to let you know, I've got employees. You're giving me this fine, you're trying to shut me down, you're trying to let my employees go who will not be able to get paid. Are you comfortable with my employees not getting paid?
Yeah.
Because I want you to go in and tell them what you're doing. And again, it's not congruent with who I am by nature, but as a result, I think they didn't come as much because they felt the pain that I had. I was very emotional about it.
Well, that's a real pain. Like that, that's not like something you made up. Like that wouldn't be something I would normally do either. But in those circumstances, I would argue you're not giving me another choice. And I'm not just going to lie down and just take it just because. I'm going to tell you that this is nonsense, or at least I think it's nonsense. And there's a lot of secondary and tertiary repercussions for this. It's not just like you give me a fine and that's the end of it.
July, August last year, my wife and I were contemplating shutting this down entirely. It's, we were struggling to keep our motor, struggling to pay our coaches, struggling to pay rent. If you had told me then, back in March of 2020, that it was going to be 18 months of this shit, we would have shut down. I would have said, no, absolutely, I'm done. I look back now, I'm exceptionally grateful that I stuck it out because we made some amazing changes to our business and I'm running a better business now than I was then.
Good.
But I wouldn't have looked upon it like that when 18 months ago.
Well, that's actually one of my biggest fears is that, I don't know what these, A, I hope the lockdowns will come. B, if they come, I don't know what they're going to look like. But more importantly, I could almost assuredly tell you that they won't be accurate based on what they originally tell us. We have no indication that they're gonna be like, all right, guys, 2 weeks to slow the spread. I'm like, it's next year. Like we've gone 18 months with this shit. Like, right. So, and my fear is that people will just give up this time. They're just gonna be like, listen, I just can't continue to do this. So I'm just shutting the doors, and maybe I file bankruptcy. Maybe I don't. Maybe I'll just like let the landlord put somebody else in there. But I do think that if this happens again, a lot of people are just going to throw their hands up, and we're going to be down a lot of affiliates. And I think we're down like 10% roughly now.
Or Fern, I mean, I don't know, we're kind of like that around here with the mask mandate. I mean, you're only seeing about 50% of the people really. I mean, most people are done with it. They're just done from a philosophical, problem standpoint. They're done with the mask, and B, they don't think they do anything. So, it's interesting. I've had this conversation right when the quarantine ended, but then there was a little after it ended, there was a little spike after the quarantine. Mm-hmm. That's how I got into this, because I started doing research. I had clients telling me, I'm not closing. And I had medical clients telling me, I'm not closing. So you need to get ready. If they come back and make me close again, they're going to have to arrest me. I'm not closing again. Now, these are doctors and physical therapists. Right. They're making a lot of money and they have money to fight. But the point is that I think I do agree with you that some of these boxes will close, but I think you will be surprised. And part of my whole pitch that we're going to talk about here is groundswell and grassroots. And if all of these businesses, if you take the busiest corridor in your city that you know of, and in my city, in a mile, there's probably 50 plus businesses there. And if every one of them refused to close and every one of them was getting ticketed, I mean, how many people do you think can come and can issue those tickets? And then they clog the court systems. Craig's one gym that's standing up and they're only coming once a week, so, it'll be interesting to see, I guess, is my point.
You make a good point that what has happened is this, and Fern, you said this, what has happened is the counties now have gotten, and the state and city governments have gotten so comfortable with mandates that they don't give any targets anymore. It became, at first it was, in the very beginning, it was, we're going to slow the spread for the hospitals. Then it was, we're going to control it so that, we limit the number of deaths and the older population. And there was targets. In California, it was like, we've got to get to X number of cases, or we got to get to X number of hospitalizations. There are no more targets. This most recent mask mandate was mask up and no end date. And it's a comfort level with mandates and executive orders that really makes me uncomfortable as a citizen, but especially as a small business owner.
Right. And that's kind of my fear, is that, and I think a lot of people are scared of the boogeyman. Geoff, you and I might have talked about this. Like when this originally came down, I think everybody agreed to do their due diligence on the front end. Like, cool, we get it. Like we'll shut down, like we'll sort it out. But then it started to get a little bit less clear, and the pain started to really set in. So I tell everybody this, because this is just due diligence, which is you should call the police department and you should say, who is going to be issuing these tickets? Right? Because if they're spread thin, the answer is probably nobody. And then the second question is like, okay, so they give me a ticket. How, like, because I don't know how it was in California, Craig, but here everybody was waving the "we're going to pull your business license" flag. And so then I was asking, like, well, who's going to do that? Like, who is the person or entity that is going to pull my business license? And this is the point I think you're going to bring up, Geoff, which is like, well, like the health department. So I asked the question, I said, how does that ticket make it from the police department once it gets into the system over to the health department? They're like, well, so-and-so would have to take it over. There has to be some paperwork filed. You have to go through this process. Cool. I call the health department. I'm like, hey, who's going to process this? And they're like, we don't even manage gyms. And I was like, so nothing is going to happen basically. But people are so afraid of the boogeyman and they're saying that we're going to pull your business license. Like, I'm just going to shut down. And I'm like, but it's not going to happen if you just kind of do your due diligence and stand up. But to both of your points earlier, which is, okay, so that you do have to go to court. Well, courts here are backed up for 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years. I'm not going to court for 2 years if I get subpoenaed right now. Right. It's not happening. That gives me 24 months to figure it out. Like, maybe I can fight this over the next 24 months if I choose to just kind of stand my ground and do that. And again, I want everybody to do their own risk assessment, but what I really want people to do is ask more questions. And one of the ones is what we talked about the other day, Geoff, which is kind of this kind of gray area that most people have with regard to licensing. And this is unknowingly beneficial to gyms, which is one of the fights that Coach Glassman was having forever, which was fighting licensure. If CrossFit affiliates had to carry licenses from a governing body, meaning the government, you could shut everybody down. They could just pull licenses willy-nilly.
So what I'm hoping is part of this is that people hear this, and it doesn't just apply to CrossFit boxes or gyms or the fitness industry, because I really think, I really believe in this. These applications are for every small business owner. And so one of the questions is, who's going to enforce this and how's it going to be enforced? I'll give you a perfect example. Our city, Shreveport, Louisiana, is not that small, 250,000, 300,000 people. Our mayor came out right around the time that the governor came out with the mask mandate. And the mayor came out with a mask mandate, and he said publicly they were going to pull your business licenses. Well, some businesses got together, hired an attorney, filed a suit against the mayor, and got it overturned. I mean, within a month. And the mayor simply did not have the statutory power to A, make the mask mandate, or B, have any criminality or pull any licenses. The problem we're seeing is that there are people in the government making statements and everybody's just believing it. I am absolutely pro cop. I'm pro police, pro law enforcement, but I have seen video after video, especially in the beginning of the pandemic, police officers saying that they're going to arrest a business owner. And, I question whether they have the authority to do that. Now, again, it comes down to specific statutes, but there have been a lot of statements made by governmental officials of, this is what I'm going to do to you. And you're exactly right, Fern. We've got to ask the questions. So you start looking at who is going to quote unquote shut you down. It's one thing to get fines like Craig got, and I think he absolutely did the right thing. And absolutely did the right. He had a great lawyer, because as a business lawyer, that's what I tell my clients all the time. Hey, if you want to spend $100,000 to make a point, hey, I'm your man. Let's do it. You could pay me $100,000. I'll take it. But really, it comes down to dollars and cents. It's got to make economic sense, and that's what good lawyers do. Is they tell their clients, look, yeah, we can go to the mat on it. You can make a great point. You might win. And you'll be everybody's hero, but you're going to spend $50,000 in the process. So you have to look at the enforcement mechanism. So for like my medical clients, they have a medical board of examiners. They have licensures that literally, if they're open, they can come and pull their license. Okay. So they're in a little bit different spot. The way they got to bars and restaurants after the quarantine, when people weren't supposed to be in bars and restaurants, or they were having too many people in there, was the alcohol licensure boards, the state boards, but if you're just a retail establishment or you're a gym, you've got to start looking at who is going to enforce this against me and how's it going to be enforced. And then you also have a lawyer that is going to start looking at the statutes that are applicable and seeing if they have a criminal or penal nature to them, that allow them. A lot of municipalities don't have the powers that the governors have. And so if a governor makes a mandate in our state, there is a fine and an imprisonment for emergency mandates. But then the state has to enforce that. And they don't necessarily get to use the local police to do that. And so you start looking. Just
to clarify, in that scenario, a state trooper would have to come.
I think so. I mean, I think, there's a real disconnect with having a city police officer come in and enforce the governor's mandate on you and issue you a ticket. I wonder where that authority comes from. Again, let me also say, I'm not a constitutional lawyer.
Right.
I do a decent amount of governmental law and represent some municipalities. But I've studied this for my clients. And so, the enforcement. And so let's go back to gyms and box owners. The enforcement mechanism there is your certificate of occupancy. So who is going to shut you down? I mean, I really don't know. That
would be the fire department.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and again, you're talking about.
I got firefighters to work here. I think I'm good.
Well, you're talking about authorities that these institutions have never exerted, right?
Right.
I mean, they're going to go to, like you said, the health department and tell health department, you need to go shut this gym down. They're like, we don't even control gyms. So you really got to question who's got the authority. Now, can they come and write you tickets? Yes. And again, Fern, you said you do the risk analysis and you determine, okay, I'm going to take these tickets. And then at some point I'm going to either decide I'm going to cry uncle because it's too much money, or I'm going to keep going. I mean, Craig told us, I think before we got on the air that, that he came out ahead financially by taking the fines, paying the fines, and staying open. And so I think you have to look at that. But this whole thing about I'm going to arrest you or I'm going to close your business down. I'm not saying that that's bull, but I'm also saying that you need to be prepared and look at that, because when that statement's made to you, just like Craig did, it made it uncomfortable for those guys giving him fines. When you come back and say, I know for a fact because of X, Y, and Z, you don't have that authority. And as a matter of fact, you don't even really have the authority to be on my property without a warrant. So, and I saw a guy chase police off of his property because they didn't have a warrant and they left. So again, I want to be very clear. I'm pro police, pro cop. They are stuck in a tough situation.
Most police in our area, in the Bay Area, and around here, the police didn't want to enforce it. And I know down in Pleasanton, the police were charged with enforcing the mandates, but they, as much as that they're training in the gym, and they as much admitted they do not like doing those calls. And police in San Francisco, same thing. They were in charge of enforcing this. So they would literally go out, have a conversation, and leave. They didn't like writing tickets and like writing fines for that activity. And the reason is they don't see small business owners as criminals. And that's, I would encourage anyone that if you feel like arrest is imminent, make sure that someone is there videoing it, because I don't think anybody, any agency wants to see a small business owner arrested for trying to stay open and survive during the pandemic.
Craig, didn't you tell me that when you and I talked when all that was going on, there were some police that came that were kind of reluctant. They're like, I don't want to be here, but I'm back. I mean, I feel for them. They're in a tough spot.
It was the greatest. You could tell by his body language when he walked up as a special investigator. They use special investigators for the district attorney's office. That's who was enforcing here for Contra Costa County. And he got out of his car and he walked up and he goes, "You know why I'm here?" And I said, "Yeah, I do know why you're here." Interesting side story to that. I was texted by another gym that just about a couple miles away saying, "Hey, they just left here. They're coming to your gym." And so I knew he was coming. And so we had all our members out of the gym. And I said, "Look, you need to come in and walk around the gym and see how we're doing it." And every time they came, I pleaded with them. I would give them a copy of my protocols, handwritten copy, or my printed out copy of my protocols. I go, "Take my protocols. I want you to see how we do it. Everybody comes in this way. You see the signage, you see the cleaning system, you see the CO2 monitor." I said, "Now we've got these fans above, we got these fans below." We walk around and I go, and I make them stand in the middle. I made him stand in the middle of the gym. And I said, "Do you feel the breeze?" He says, "Yeah, I do." I said, that's on purpose. I said, we've got air flowing through here. Our air quality here is better here than inside than it is outside. And he goes, you know what, Craig? I was never here. He literally turned and walked out. And it was awesome. It was a relief. And that's really what I wanted from my county and my city, was for them to come look at what I'm doing. And
yeah, we're always talking about the science. So you had some science going on.
Yeah. These things can be measured. And, how much, I literally Googled it. How do I know if I'm breathing someone else's air? And there's formulas for this. And it's carbon dioxide measurements. And it's really easy to measure. And you can measure airflow as well. It's cubic feet per minute. And there's monitors and devices to measure it all. Yeah.
Well, let me give you a story. Right after we came back from the quarantine, we have a box that has 4 or 5 garage doors on either side. So when they're all open, I mean, it's almost an outdoor facility.
Right.
Our box owner put us in 10 by 10 taped off boxes. Everything was wiped down. I will say there weren't a lot of masks to be found, but I'm telling you, we put 100 plus people through that gym every day.
Mm-hmm.
I went almost every day. I can count on barely 2 hands the number of people who got COVID in that gym, and every one of them said, I absolutely didn't get it from here. I got it from somewhere else. So this concept that gyms are a germ-ridden business that's going to spread COVID is just, it hadn't been true even by an inkling in ours. And I know it's not in yours, Craig.
The whole gyms carry germs thing, that's a leftover impression from the 90s and maybe early 2000s. Gyms, by and large, gyms are ultra hygienic, because that's the one reason why people won't come back to a gym, is it's dirty. We had, during that entire time, March all the way through May of this year, 60,000 visits and not one case reported from here. 60,000 plus visits. And what we do is we spread them out, we keep them moving, we don't let them hang out inside too long, we run fans. It's really a simple process. And I was hopeful that the city or the county would come and work with us, but they never did. And so I had to take matters into my own hand.
Well, and that's kind of what we want. So I want to let you kind of chime in here, Geoff. That's kind of what we want to get to, is just like, hey, like, we can't assume it's not coming. Let's plan and hope that it's not, but we have to plan for that it is, right? So I've already made phone calls to my lawyer, to the police department, just to kind of see what's going on. I made a phone call the first time to come to find out in one of the adjacent cities. And they were just like, yeah, the enforcement arm is this. And yeah, there's nobody that sits in that seat. Like, there's not even a person there. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's not going to go well for enforcement purposes. But what other things should people be considering, Geoff, with regard to just having information and being prepared to, I don't want to say be combative about it, but like push back?
Well, I mean, I'll say it, plan. We've already got the blueprint. All of the executive orders that they're going to use now were the same executive orders that they wrote then. So first and foremost, if you're in an area where you think lockdowns are probable, and we just know there's certain parts of the country where that may be the case, you need to have a lawyer. And so people will say, you need to have them now, not a month from now when they start closing down. And people say, well, I can't afford it. Then that's when we need to band together 5 gyms or 5 boxes. And I include gyms. When it comes to something like this, it needs to be people in the fitness industry. So it needs to be the Globo Gym, the Anytime Fitness, the CrossFit box. 5 or 6 of us get together. We hire a lawyer. We say, look, here, the last time, these were the orders. These were the applicable state orders, county orders, city orders. We need you to go through them. We need you to tell us what they can and can't do. Then, and we'll help you, because we'll help you save some of our money, just like Fern's doing. We're going to call some of the municipalities and we're going to ask, how is this enforced? How is that enforced? But you got a plan, and you've got somebody looking at the orders that came down that are pretty much going to be the same orders that they use again. And so you've got to prepare, and you've got to study. I mean, nobody goes into their craft without being ready. I don't go into court without, and just wing it. And so you've got to start planning now. If you're in an area where you think that that's going to happen. And so let's say you have a lawyer. Why should you foot the bill and let everybody, piggyback and copycat off of you? Try to get some other people in there as a group, other gyms, so that you guys can share the bill for the lawyer, and you can be ready. So planning is huge, and do not wait till the first tickets start coming out. I think you need to look at the stuff now. And that's what I did when my clients were saying, I'm not closing again. And so I started pulling lawsuits inside of our state, and started looking at the cases they were citing and the law they were citing, and learning from what other lawyers had already fought. So the biggest thing for me is get ready now. And that's how you do it.
Are there things that people could be doing now that would, let's just say, I've done my homework, I've got a couple things identified that, let's just say the authorities do show up. Is there anything available, whether if I look at, the statutes or the executive orders, and I find a kind of gap in those, that I could post or do something or lock my doors that would just cause the authorities to just turn around? They're like, well, we can't even do this right now based on this.
I think there are things that you can say that question their abilities and their authorities. I think I question whether any police officer has the authority to arrest you for something that along the lines of what Craig was getting tickets for. Mm-hmm. But if I was really gonna stand my ground on it, I would want to have researched it well, and I would want to say, I don't believe that you can arrest me to enforce a governor's emergency order. And here's why. So I think research of the statutes, and like you say, finding gaps in them, and calling people's bull when they say that they have the authority to do something and they don't, because they don't want to get called on the carpet. They don't want to get they don't want to get their municipality sued because they did something that they probably thought they didn't have the authority to do. Mm-hmm. So, again, I don't want to put cops or investigators or any of those people in a tough spot. I think you speak civilly with them and in an educated manner, things are going to go well. You show your rear end and start cussing them, things are not going to go well.
I don't think anybody's suggesting we do that, but I'm also, right. I don't want people to just lay down, because in some instances you might not have to. I've had conversations with different lawyers and people say, hey, listen, like, you should put cipher locks on all your doors so that nobody can just walk in your facility. Like, only right. people with the code can walk in your facility. Because if a police officer or sheriff or anybody physically can't get into the building, well, then they definitely can't ticket you. What would they be ticketing you for? They would have to physically be able to see what was going on inside the facility.
Right. I mean, then you get into issues of probable cause. They have probable cause that there's some sort of crime being committed in there. But it makes it much more difficult, and allows you as the owner to step outside and have a conversation
exactly
with the enforcement folks. But again, all of that comes back to being ready and planning. Mm-hmm. And I do not recommend people try to do it on their own. I said this the last time, the couple podcasts we've done before. You can pay me a little bit now, or you can pay me a lot later. Right. Because you didn't pay me a little bit now to get you ready and educated. And then you went and did something you shouldn't have done. And now we're going to have to fight this. So we're going to have to go to court over it. So my recommendation is pay some lawyers now to educate you and get you ready. And hoping that it saves you money in the long run.
Craig, do you guys have any sort of plans? You can plead the fifth here if you'd like. But do you guys have any plans? Because obviously California has been less than friendly to small businesses throughout this whole thing.
Same thing. I think for us, I want to make sure that I'm not cavalier about this.
Right.
If an enforcement officer walks in, I want them to see, I want them to visually see what we're doing to prevent the spread of COVID. I want them to get an impression through our signage, through our monitors, and through our space, our safe distancing. And I'll have protocols up front ready for them to take if they want them. So that way they get a sense and impression like, okay, something's happening. That's important when you go to, and I noticed this in the appeal process. I had an opportunity to talk and describe all of those things. And what was interesting is the investigator that spoke mentioned all of those things. Mr. Howard tried to hand me his protocols. Mr. Howard, tried to show us the inside of all of those things were said. So I think it put me in a better position as a gym when you're defending those things to make an effort. So don't be cavalier. I wouldn't take this serious. People shouldn't be hugging and high-fiving each other and no protocols in place. So that's important, and we'll have that. The other thing that I do, that I've done and continue to do, is when these mandates are published, they're put on the website, and then you'll see on either the county or the city or state, depending upon whose mandate it is. And you can get it, you can download it, and you can read the details of it. I think that's important, because that'll also give you information usually as to who's going to enforce or how it's going to be enforced or what the fines may be. And it's good to verse yourself in that as well. So for us, that's what we're doing. And then and then I just wait. I'm doing a lot more often, because I don't want my employees to have the officers. I want to be the guy.
Right. Okay.
One more thing too, Fern, though, I thought about is, big companies and substantial companies, they use, lobbyists. They have people who go and talk to the politicians for them. Obviously, most groups or coalitions, even if you get 5 or 6 gyms together, don't have the money for a lobbyist. But what you can start doing is thinking of people in influence in your city that can go talk to people who are in government, in these positions, and get them on your side. Maybe it's a doctor who believes in fitness, who has a certain reputation in the community, or maybe it's maybe you're lucky enough to have a city council person in your box, and start creating those alliances so that when all that comes down, you've got people on the inside to speak for you, because you can't afford the lobbyist.
No.
But we all know that politics plays a big hand in all this, and so that's another thing to be thinking about, is trying to find people of influence in your box or in your industry, or who believe in your industry, and get them on your side again before it all starts coming down.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident in that most gyms have about 1 degree of separation from a person that has significant political influence. Most of them, I know for sure we do, and those phone calls have been made multiple times, because when the people of influence make it painful for city, local, state government, they start to listen. I've been on multiple phone calls with state legislators talking about like what a nightmare this is, and how poorly it was executed. And I don't think you should be afraid to make those phone calls. You should call the mayor's office. You should call the sheriff's office. You should get them on the phone and let them know that this is not okay. Not okay from the standpoint of like, it wasn't executed properly. It wasn't communicated properly. There was a lot of gray area on why certain people got to stay open and why certain people had to close. And I think not enough people the first time made a stink to the people that make the decisions. It was just a bunch of people bitching at each other, and that doesn't really help. It's like now everybody needs to direct all of that attention upward and make those people's lives miserable. Like, listen, if you're going to run this city, I'm going to make you run it. Like, and I'm going to make your life miserable in order for that to make that happen. And you can do that, and you can do it civilly, meaning like in a polite manner. And I think we should, because I tell you what, they all want to be reelected. So.
Well, and that's I do a lot of zoning work, and before we get a zoning change, we always contact the city councilman whose district our property is in, and the parish commissioner whose district it's in. And that's a great comment, Fern, is to, if you are in fear that this could really come to your area, you need to get those folks into your gyms now. You need to do what Craig's doing. You call your city councilman and you say, I need you to come see what we're doing. So if this comes up, I want you to understand what we do. I mean, we've already proven through the first quarantine that gyms are not the boogeyman. that people said that they were, and there is absolutely no proof at all that COVID was spread through gyms more than it would have been spread through any other place. So we know that. And so I think, again, getting ahead of it is those people represent your area where your business is. That's where their votes come from. And getting them into your gyms and getting them to understand, just like we do with the zoning or a business we're going to put in their district, we get them to understand what we're planning to do and how we're trying to do it. And you might be surprised at who comes to bat for you. We've got a guy who's a councilman here, and he's very involved in our 2-day not CrossFit competition we do here, our functional fitness competition. But he's a parish commissioner, and he is so pro-business. Everybody's pro-business, but this guy is really pro-business. If it's a good business and it's good for the area, then he likes it. And so, you find people like that who are pro-business, pro-small business, and you explain to them what you're doing and like what Craig has done and what you're trying to do for people's health. You're going to win some people over.
What about landlords, Geoff? What kind of conversations should we be having there? Because that's going to kill small businesses faster than the dealing with local authorities.
Yeah, well.
So what we talked about in some of our prior podcasts, Fern, is, and what Craig just talked about was deferred rent. If you defer rent where you just lump it on the back, yeah, that's a killer. But if you do some sort of graduated approach, I want you to defer 6 months of my rent, and then starting on month 7, start putting a little bit on top of month 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and so forth, and let me basically amateurize it.
That's exactly what we did, right? So yeah. I think I had like 20 months left on the lease. And I laid it out kind of like what we've all been talking about. And I said, hey, listen, here's what we have deferred, right? Here's what that's going to cost me. If you make me pay all of that right now or prior to the close of this fiscal year or calendar year, that's a X percentage increase in my overhead. It's not tenable. I'm your largest client in this building, and I know you don't want me to default on rent. So here's what I suggest. Take it out, amortize it over the full length of the rest of the terms of the lease. At that point, you're made whole and I can still function here. And they said, absolutely, we'll do that for you.
Right. And so you just have to also look at your market. I mean, there are some markets, and right now real estate in general is pretty hot. It's hard to find good real estate right now. In Shreveport, Louisiana, we're not that big, and we have the same issue. So you do have to analyze whether your landlord's looking to put somebody else in there and at a higher rent. And so you're going to have to play that game. But the great thing about commercial leasing is there's not tons of regulations on it, even in California, that typically have a lot of housing and real estate regulations. In other words, you can chop it up with your landlord however y'all make it work. And that's what I recommend you do. They will sympathize that you don't have income coming in, but you also have to sympathize that they've taken a heck of a hit, particularly if they have multifamily properties in their portfolio and they're getting killed on that with the moratoriums. And so, we're all living through this, and we all got to make it work. And so, I would try to find as much of a win-win scenario as you can with your landlord, but creative rent payment and deferments are, I think, the way to go, and try to find ways to make that work. In months where you do well, you can have an agreement that you'll pay X percentage of your, you can create all sorts of stuff. If I gross more than X, I'm going to pay you 15% of that on top of what I pay you for the rent, whatever. But I think, I guess what I'm trying to say is if you come to your landlord and you pour mouth, the landlord's going to be like, man, I'm having the same, unless the landlord's just independently wealthy, the landlord's going to say, I'm having the same problems you're having.
Right. And, yeah. He's like, that's an old story, my friend. Like we all know what's going on.
It's not going to keep going. That
said, though, it's an important consideration. And some CrossFit affiliate owners are finding that the landlords had the opportunity to get PPP support as well, and the EIDL as well. And I think it's important somehow to either one, figure out if your landlord got that,
right,
make sure that their relief does not turn into pure profit because you're paying % of rent. Like that relief should trickle down.
correct.
That's a good point. It's a great point.
But to their tenants as well. So
yeah, and I know and this is kind of where I've recommended everybody, which is don't be the lamb that goes to slaughter here. I'm not saying don't pay rent. I'm not saying any of those things. All I'm saying is don't be pressured to do something prematurely. Like when my landlord first came in, I was like, listen, I'm going to make you whole. And if I can pay you sooner than we agreed upon, I will absolutely do that. But right now, I'm not giving you anything because I don't have it, number one. And number two, if I did have it, I don't have any idea if I'm going to need it or not. But I give you my word, you will be square when this is all done. And you can tell your landlord, be like, listen, I really would like to figure out like how long this is going to last, because if I just fork out rent to you right now, full boat, and then I find out this is going to last for 6 more months, well, then that may have been the only cushion that I had to survive during that time frame. And that's kind of just pump the brakes. Like it will be fine as long as you're having a conversation and communicating with them, and then saying, hey, listen, like I'm going to do this, but like it's not reasonable for people to just walk off a cliff blindfolded when they have no idea what's in front of them.
Right. I mean, I do quite a bit of collection work, commercial collection work and other kinds. And I could tell you that my pet peeve is the person who owes, let's just say they owe $15,000. Okay. They owe my client $15,000. They haven't made an attempt to pay any of it. They haven't paid $100 a month. They haven't paid $60 a month. And then I file suit. They don't answer the lawsuit. I get a judgment. And then they come in when I get to finally examine them after I have the judgment. And they're like, giving me the sob story and this, and what can we do to work it out? And I'm like, I'll work with you all day long if you'll just show an effort. Mm-hmm. But it's the people who don't show any effort. And then at the end, they want the grace. And so it goes the same way with a tenant and a landlord. If you can show that you're going to work with them and you're going to pay them, and just like you said, Fern, and I'm going to give you my word that we're going to do X, and they see the result, they see the activity, it makes it a lot more palatable when you need to come back to them for that month and say, I didn't make any money this month. We got killed. But if you just sit there and come back every month and say, I got nothing to pay you, at some point the landlord's just not going to be able to keep doing that.
Yeah,
that's good advice right there. Pay something. Like keep them. Let them know that you're doing something. I think that gives you a lot of influence. You're right. One thing I want to talk about before we get to the end, Fern, and I may be jumping ahead, is what we talked about earlier with this grassroots and groundswell. Yep. That's part of what I believe will be able to save businesses. And it has to come not just from gyms and global gyms, CrossFit boxes, but I think it's got to come from all the businesses, because what's happened, and Craig talked about this, we've gotten so used to just laying down for these mandates. It's like, oh, they said we have to do it, so we have to do it. And then what happens is, let's say there's 10 businesses on your block and you're the one who's going to fight it. And they all say, yeah, we're behind you. Yeah, we're going to do the same thing. And then when you open, they all close. All right, well, what kind of influence is that? But if everybody's doing it, or a vast majority of everybody's doing it, right now, and it may change as people get back to work, but right now, governments don't have enough people working anyway, or they're working from home still, or they're shorthanded. And so how are they going to get all of these people to come give tickets, process them through the courts, all of that? If businesses stand up and say, find some other way to control this, but you're not shutting us down. Mm-hmm. And we all refuse to do that. The groundswell is going to have an effect politically. It is going to have an effect from just an administrative standpoint. How are they going to process all of those fines, fine them, get them all through the court system? At some point, somebody's going to cry uncle. But
if you're the only one standing on your block saying that I'm not closing down, like kind of like Craig was, and I'm sure he was probably, of the CrossFit boxes in that area, was probably the one guy standing in the field screaming by himself, and everybody else is like, well, I'm too afraid of the big bad wolf, and I'm going to close. So I really emphasize that. And I've been telling people in my municipality the same thing. I mean, think about if all of y'all said, nah, we're not going to close, and bring whatever you got on us, but we're not going to close. And, I have to believe that would have an effect in a variety of ways. One of them is administratively. I mean, how are they going to process all those people? How are they going to ticket them? Who's going to go out and do that? How are we going to get all that through the court system? And it's a battle I'd be willing to have, and I'd like to see how it plays out.
No, I agree. And that's just, I think far more people are amenable to that idea this time, where everybody before was like just a little bit more scared, because I think a lot of it was just so unknown. And even there's still a lot of unknowns at this point. People have been kind of pushed to the brink. So I just don't, number one, I just don't see people going along this time. I just want them to be armed with the necessary information to either delay any sort of interaction they might have with authorities or local municipalities, or just be able to outright say, no, you can't do that. Like that's not how that executive order is written. So no, I don't actually have to do that at all. You need to have the governor or whoever rewrite that if that's how you wanted this to play. So that's really kind of was the genesis of this, because that's rumbling of lockdowns is coming back. And again, I think we all agree about how that at the end of the day, health is the greatest, defense against all chronic disease, much less just like illnesses and stuff like COVID. The best thing people could do is be healthy, which is quite literally our specialty. I always have a pet peeve when they say health, health professionals. And I'm like, no, those are sickness professionals. We're health professionals. I know how to make people healthy. They know how to stop people from being sick. So I think that's important. And I think that's more of the conversation that should be had, and people need to be a little bit more vocal about it. And I know, people worry about getting canceled and all this other stuff, but listen, at this point, if you don't stand up, you're going to get canceled another way, right? You just have no business to stand for. So.
Yeah, you've got a plan. One thing that I didn't say earlier is that, for example, with the mayor in our city, mayors typically have fewer powers than governors. So when something comes from a mayor, something comes from a mayor or a local municipality, you really need to have a lawyer look at that and see if they have that authority. I mean, we had our mayor telling people that he was going to take their business licenses. He had absolutely no authority to do that, and had to get sued and taken to court. And again, we aren't some 50,000 population city. I mean, and our mayor just came out and said, we're going to shut your businesses down without any authority whatsoever to say that. So, again, plan, be ready, have somebody look at this stuff. And then that way, as Fern said, when somebody says that I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, you can just say, I don't know for a fact you can't do that.
Well, gentlemen, it is Friday. We've all got places to be, but no, in all seriousness, I appreciate both of your time.
Yeah, it's happy hour where you are, Fern.
Hey, always happy hour here at CrossFit Rife. It's probably the same with Diablo, but Craig, I appreciate you, sharing your story. Geoff, I always appreciate these conversations. And outside of this conversation about lockdowns, Geoff wasn't kind of blowing smoke earlier. Anybody that has contacted us via the podcast or on Instagram that has been in need of some kind of legal advice with regard to leases or any of that stuff, I have forwarded them over, and Geoff has done his best to help them out. And all of those have been good outcomes. So if you do have questions that's just outside of your pay grade and you're just like, hey, this is not anything that I'm up to speed on, we will gladly connect you. And then outside of that, Craig, appreciate you fighting the fight, brother. Obviously, a long-standing CrossFit affiliate, and doing the right things out there in California. I hope it doesn't happen. Like I said, I hope this podcast is completely irrelevant. and nobody ever needs it. So
Likewise.
I tell you what, a little funny story for when Craig was going through that, I was calling like all the hotshot lawyers in California trying to get somebody to take his case. I called Garagos's office. I called all these people, all these hotshot lawyers. So, I believe in the cause. I believe in what we're doing, and I'll help whenever I can. So
Thanks for being a shoulder to cry on.
Hey man, it was a great story.
Oh,
yours is one of the greatest stories that came out of it, in my opinion. So
thank you.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate it. And I hope to see you guys soon. Craig, I hope to see you at the games or maybe at the next CrossFit, affiliate gathering. Jeff, we will catch up soon, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cheers.
So you never miss an episode of the podcast, subscribe to our YouTube channel and on all major podcasting platforms at Best Hour of Their Day. Thank you so much for tuning in and for being a part of the best hour of our day. See you next time.